him. You saw this man every single night and every corner of this entire ship. You've also seen him in the gym 4 times a day, if you've been paying attention. He is a bundle of energy, an absolute encyclopedia of knowledge, and he's the man I wish to be when I grow up. Do me a favor. Put your hands together for the one and only, the Gator, Mr. Jerry Blavitt.
Now, can I have my vest? How about this guy?
We're going to get right back at that.
Yeah, my mate, let me tell you, I wore my jacket. It came down to my knees. Anyway, let me tell you, the wonderful chats that we've had has been all about music. But if you go back to show business, in the beginning of show business, every performer would either have an opening act as a comedian, or going really back, they would have the dancers, and then the comedian, and then the star. But what happened is the comedian became the star with this guy, and he has an amazing career. Would you welcome an incredible chat with Tom Dreesen? Ladies and gentlemen, my main man. You still look like you're 20 years old.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the name. What is your
My name, I'll give you the name, Jilly Rizzo.
There you go.
But Tom, you know, you really, I don't know if you realize this, folks, but Tom is from Harvey, Illinois, right? Chicago, right? And he started, yeah, anybody here from Chicago? And, oh, and you started out as an insurance salesman.
Well, I didn't start out as an insurance salesman. I started out as a 6-pound, 7-ounce baby boy. I didn't come out of the womb and say, what do you do with health insurance? Now, when I came out of the service, I was born in Harvey, as a suburb on the south side of Chicago. The steel mills and factories. When I was growing up, it was a microcosm of America. Really, it was people from all races and religions, mostly blue-collar people. There were factories like Whiting Corporation, Buda Corporation, Alice Chalmer, Ingalls and Shepherd, Perfection Gear, all these factories. And we had 36 taverns where all these factory people would go to the tavern before they go to work and after they came out of work. So we had 36 taverns in all, and it was a blue-collar town. I had 8 brothers and sisters. We actually lived in a shack behind one of the factories. It was a raggedy, if a window broke, you stuck a rag in it. If you had holes in your shoes, you put cardboard in it. And my older brother and I would shine shoes in all the taverns in town and sell newspapers on the corner. None of this do I regret, by the way, but to help feed my brothers and sisters. And so it was a blue-collar town. Now, we were such poor kids. When I was going to high school, I was embarrassed sometimes of the way I went to school. You know, when you're in high school, everybody dresses to the nines or as best as they can. And I had holes in my shoes and all that stuff. So my sophomore year, I quit high school and worked in bowling alleys and stuff till I was 17. Then I went in the Navy the day I turned 17 and got a high school diploma from the Navy. I went to junior college nights, studied political science. I wanted to be a politician, but then I found out being a comedian is the same thing. You know. Anyhow, so I went to junior college nights. You know, when I came out of service, I got married real early before I got out of service, and one baby came, and another baby came, and another baby, and I was going from job to job. I worked construction. I wheeled concrete. I poured sidewalks in basements as a laborer. You know, I sold life insurance later, but I also was a photographer, and I helped selling pictures. My older brother was a photographer, so I worked with him in that. And I was a private detective. My cousin was a police detective agency, so I would husband and wife tailing. A couple of you are in the audience. I'm not going to point them out. You know. But stakeouts and stuff like that. Anyhow, I went from job to job, wandering aimlessly, never, ever thought I'd ever be in show business. It was the furthest thing from my mind. But I, honest to God, at that time was praying. I was asking God, I said, this can't be what I'm supposed to be doing. I wasn't fulfilled in any of these occupations. Sometimes I'd be in a bar at 2 o'clock in the morning and I'd be sitting around and I'd say, with all my buddies, I'd say, I don't belong here. But I didn't know where I belonged. You know, but I knew I didn't belong there. And I was literally praying at that time. And going from job to job. And finally, I joined a civic group called the JCs, the Junior Chamber of Commerce at that time. And it was young men of action, guys 18 to 36, that attacked the problems of the community. Whatever problems that are in the community, you would form groups, committees. They teach you how to serve on a committee, how to chair a committee, subcommittees, Robert's Rules of Order, leadership training programs, by making the community a better place to live. And JCs were worldwide. Well, it would make the state a better place to live, and eventually the world a better place to live. So that's what JCs are all about. Now, while doing this, I was learning all these skills, but one of the problems in our community was drugs, our youth using drugs. And they weren't teaching drug education at a college level or a high school level, let alone at an elementary school level. So I had an idea. I said, why don't I write a program on how to teach grade school children, 8th graders, before they get into high school, the ills of drug abuse. And I knew it was such a serious subject that you'd have to start out and lighten it up a little bit. So I said we'll play records and do some comedy, make people laugh, tell some jokes or something. Again, never thinking I'd ever be in this business. And as fate would have it, the night I'm proposing this to the JCs for them to sanction it as a JC project, a young black man joined the chapter he graduated from Norfolk State College. E.I. DuPont recruited him into Chicago as a marketing representative. And he joined the JCs. And the very first night after I proposed this idea, he came up and said, gee, I'd like to work with you on that. And I said, I'm sorry, I already have a guy. I had a white friend named John DeBoer that was going to help me. Now, as fate would have it, the next day, John DeBoer calls me and said, I can't do that job. I've got a new job. I can't help you with your program. And I said, gee, what was that black guy's name? Oh, yeah, Tim Reed. So Tim and I worked on the project together. We rehearsed it. We went into the classrooms, and it became an instant success. The moment we walked in the classroom, I went, wow, I knew this was going to work, because the children were black and white. And when they saw a young black guy and a young white guy, we got their attention right away. And we start joking off of one another, playing records, getting the kids laughing, and then planning the ills of drug abuse. One day, the program became very successful. The JCs use it as a model program through their publications in 50 states and in 22 foreign countries, how to teach drug education at an elementary school level, at an 8th grade level. And one day, a little 8th grade girl walking out of the classroom said, you guys are funny. You ought to become a comedy team. An 8th grade girl.
Really, that's how it began?
Her name was Vicky Sarufka, and I never forgot her name, because when I asked her name, I knew her uncle. I said, oh, is Benny Sarufka your uncle? And so that name stayed in my brain. Years go by, we wrote a book. Tim and I stayed together for 6 years, but we wrote a book, and she came to one of the book signings,
Wow.
But it was her idea.
And that was the beginning of Tom and Tim.
Tim and Tom.
Yeah.
Tim and
I
Tom.
want to get you first.
No, but
I want to get you first.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that was so. What we did, but by the way, there were no my point about insurance salesman. I was selling insurance at that time, and Tim was a marketer. We were both salesmen. We were great salesmen, but not very good comedians. We could sell them wanting to use us.
But you were selling insurance at that point, right?
I was the what?
Were you selling insurance at
at that time, and Tim was also selling products for E.I. DuPont.
And there was a disc jockey who really meant it, helped you guys, right, in Chicago?
Yeah.
Vinny?
A black guy named Vince Sanders. There was a radio station in Harvey, Illinois called WBEE. And he was broadcasting a charity he was going to do at Providence Hospital, an all-black hospital. And Tim heard it on the radio. He said, let's go talk to that guy and volunteer to do a show. At that time, Tim and I did a couple of shows, I'll tell you a tragic story. Again, this is 1969. America was in turmoil. I mentioned that last night for those of you who are here. The Vietnam War was raging. The students were protesting all over America. African Americans were rioting in every major city. And in the middle of all this, we decided to become a comedy team. And the fourth time on stage, a guy put a lit cigarette out in Tim's face in Chicago Heights, Illinois, and then tried to beat the bejesus out of me. And I boxed when I was in the service, but he outweighed me by 100 pounds and pummeled me, And then that night, a couple of my Italian buddies jumped over the bar, and it became a Donnybrook, a fight all over the place. The guy, it's a long story, I threw a punch at the guy, the big guy, and he ducked it, and I went over his shoulder. Now, this guy, we later found out, played 1 year with the Philadelphia Eagles and was with the taxi squad with the Chicago Bears. It's a big guy. When I threw the punch and missed him, he pulled me to him, and he grabbed me like this by the chest, and he squeezed me as hard as he could. I thought he was going to break my ribs, and he lifted me up like this, and my legs went up and broke a table when he broke it on a table. And I couldn't breathe. I mean, I was gasping for air. The owner come running out of the back, and he's going to try to break up the fight. My two Italian buddies jumped over the bar. They were going to help him break it up a fight. And he let go of me, and I went up against the bar. And I'm gasping for air, and there was a railing there on the bar, and I put my foot there, and they spun it, and I threw another punch at him. I think it would have knocked out Muhammad Ali. I missed him, and I hit the owner and knocked the owner right to the floor.
That was the end of the engagement.
That was. But by the way, Tim and I got $30 for 4 shows, $15 a piece, you know. But anyhow, so we're getting in the car that night, and that was the 4th time we've ever been on stage. We get in the car that night, and Tim's scarred up, and I'm beat up. I can hardly breathe. And we're driving away, and Tim looked at me, and he said, "Welcome to show business." But anyhow, Tim heard of this guy, Vince Sanders. We went there. Vince was playing records, and he saw us through the glass. He went to a commercial break, and we went in and said, "Hey, we're a comedy team, and we understand you're doing a charity." And so he said, "Well, show me what you do." And he put a record on, you know, and Tim and I did some little stupid bit in front of him. And he liked us, put us on that show, and he ended up managing us.
Yep.
Vince Sanders, he passed away.
Wonderful black disc jockey.
Oh, God, he was a brilliant man who had a Shakespearean voice, you know, and he had a show called Opinion. He'd say, "Welcome, you're on Opinion," and people would call up and tell him, "You know, this afternoon, a guy drove his car," and every now and then I'd call and pretend I was somebody from the community and try to fool them, you know.
Now, let me ask you this now. You then broke up, and you then went on your own, right? Because the other guy went into television, right?
Well, Tim wanted to be more of an actor,
Right.
but we stayed together for 6 years. And by the way, he had a great success. We had an album. We did the David Frost Show. We did some things. We worked what they affectionately called the Chitlin Circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs. In those days, there were no comedy clubs.
Right.
So we had to get on stage anywhere we could. So the Chitlin Circuit were black-owned, black-operated nightclubs. Like I said, in Chicago, the Guys and Gals, the Burning Spear,
Black Orchid.
High Chaparral, the Cotton Club. In Boston, the Sugar Shack. In Atlantic City, the Club Harlem.
Right.
Long before they had gambling.
Atlantic City, you had Peps, you had the Showboat, places in the Blue Note like that. You know, I'm just thinking about something. I Spy, Robert Culp, and Cosby. Yeah. Back before you guys were really doing what you were doing.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Whenever they mention that, they'll say, well, you know, Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor did a movie. Well, Tim and I did a routine where he was teaching me how to be black in 1969, 1970. In 72 or 73, that movie came out.
Right.
We did that routine all across
But
the land.
Cosby and Culp were doing the I Spy in the 60s, basically.
Yeah, but on TV, not live.
Right.
It's one thing doing it behind a camera and you're in charge. It's another going out into the belly of the beast.
Yeah.
Tim and I, we went into the belly of the beast. We went into the north and the south where I mean, at that time, the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964.
Uh-huh.
We were 5 years removed from that. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. Martin Luther King was assassinated.
Yeah.
You know, and we were going out there among them, you know.
Well, some of the, when you came out, before you came out, we talked about the comedian would open up for an artist, okay, before comedy really became as big. Vegas, you know, going back with Frank was Pat Henry, you know, going back before you and Charlie Callis and all that. But who were some of the acts that were on the circuit with you? Because I go back with Dinah Washington and Sarah Vaughan and Billy Eckstein with those guys because they worked the Sepia Circuit, as you said.
I worked with Billy. I worked with some of those people in the Chitlin Circuit. When we worked in Detroit, at that time Motown was in Detroit.
Mm-hmm. The Flame
there was
Show Bar.
There was a place called the 20 Grand.
Yep.
A gangster named Bill Kabush owned it, and at the 20 Grand, all the Motown acts broke in there.
Yep.
Diana Ross and the Supremes, Smokey Robinson, the Miracles, the OJs, the Temptations, and they also worked the Chitlin Circuit, the Club Harlem. Interesting thing about the Club Harlem, in those days when you worked nightclubs, you would start on a Monday and close on a Saturday night. The Club Harlem opening night was Saturday night. First show, 10 o'clock. Second show, 2 o'clock in the morning. Third show, 6 o'clock Sunday morning. It was called the Breakfast Show. And all the waiters and the waitresses and all the bartenders would come down there, and all the pimps and their hoes from Newark, from Philadelphia, from Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan. They would bring if they had a job well done, they would bring them down, and they would sit like 1,300 people in the room, and they would pay. You know, the guy would pay $500 or $600 to sit down front, so they could come in last. they'd have the table so they could style, and the pimps would come in with their hose and come in last.
You know, it's funny. Do you know that Sammy's mom, Babe Sanchez, worked across the street at the little Belmont?
And that's where Sammy's father met her.
Absolutely.
That's right, yeah.
You know, he's painting a picture of show business that will never, ever be again.
When I toured with Sammy, he used to tell me those stories all the time. And his father, Sammy Davis's father, toured with us. No, he toured with us sometimes, and he would tell us stories about Sammy. I'd like to tell you a story that I tell in my one-man show. It's the greatest single performance that I'd ever seen in my life. And I've toured for 51 years now with some of the greatest names show business has ever known. But when Tim Reed and I were a comedy team, there was a thing in Chicago called the Black Expo, the Black Exposition, where all the black businessmen from all across the land, businessmen and women, would come, and for 1 week of business exchanges, they would promote each other's businesses and try to help each other out. But it ended with a big show in a huge coliseum, about 15,000 people. And on the show was every black artist in America would perform on there, do 1 or 2, 3 songs. Smokey Robinson, The Miracles, The Temptations, the OJs, Marvin Gaye, Diana Ross and Supreme. Everybody would come in and do 2 or 3 songs and leave, 2 or 3 songs and leave. 15,000 people. 4 months prior to this, and by the way, all those comedians were waiting in the wings. And if they needed to strike the stage for the singers, they'd say, get up and do 5 minutes, get up and do 10 minutes so they could strike the stage for the next singer. So Tim and I waited 6 hours before we got to perform, which I didn't mind because I was watching the best act show business had ever known, and it was just like going to school for me. Now, 4 months prior to that, Sammy Davis Jr. was invited to the White House. Nixon gave him an award, and he hugged President Nixon, and that picture was taken. Now, first of all, if you know Sammy Davis Jr., he hugged stop signs, He hugged everybody. If he met you once and you'd said, well, hey, this is Jerry, he'd hug you, So Sammy, when he got the award, he hugged President Nixon, and a picture was taken, and that picture went on the cover of Jet and the cover of Ebony, and Sammy became persona non grata in the black community because they were very anti-Nixon. So they were anti him. Now, he had not appeared in front of a black audience in the 4 months after this picture was taken. Now, we're at the Black Expo in this big coliseum, and everybody's mumbling, big noise. Sammy Davis Jr. is coming with his entourage. He had flown 3,500 miles, came from overseas to be there that day. With no sleep at all, he flew there, and he's going to go on next, and everybody's huddling Sammy Davis. Sammy walked out, and the MC said, ladies and gentlemen, before he brought Sammy, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, please, Sammy Davis Jr., and 15,000 people began to boo and jeer. Boo, get off the stage, get off the stage, you Uncle Tom. Name and white man's N-word, get off this. They're booing so loud. Sammy he wanted to get his conductor, George Rhodes, into the countdown to drown out the boos. And it was deafening. George Rhodes. And George could not hear it. So Sammy just stood there while they booed and they jeered and they screamed. And all of us backstage got knots in our stomach. The great Sammy Davis Jr. being treated like this. And it was painful. And the MC went out. He said, ladies and gentlemen, what is our struggle all about? If it isn't about individual freedom, what we're fighting for. If a man wants to be a Democrat, a Protestant, a Jew, a Catholic, whatever, isn't that what we're fighting for, individual freedom? The man came 3,500 miles to sing for you. Doesn't he at least deserve to be heard? Mumble, grumble, everybody sat down. Sammy went over and changed the sheet music. Yep. He sang one song. He sang I Gotta Be Me. And that song never meant ever what it meant that night. He walked that stage, whether I'm right, whether I'm wrong, whether I find a place in this world or never belong, I gotta be me. I'll go it alone if that's how it must be. I can't be right for somebody else if I'm not right for me. And halfway through the song, we're going, oh my God. You could see he's getting this crowd back. At the end of that song, a standing ovation. Like they stood and cheered like, we still don't believe your politics, but that was pretty special what you just did. Yeah. My point about that, in my 51 years in show business, I've seen people take a tough crowd and after 45 minutes or an hour get them back. I've seen people take on a dark night, a rainy night, have a tough time but get them back. I've never seen anyone take a hostile audience and in one song get a standing ovation. That's the greatest single performance I've ever seen in show business. God bless you, Sammy Davis Jr., wherever you are.
Do you know, Sammy did not want to sing that song. Steve Lawrence had the original version of that from the Broadway play. I think it was Golden Rainbow or something like that.
You're right.
And Steve Lawrence, talking about that night, I was with Sammy at the Latin, because as you know, I was Sammy's best man when he married Altabese. It's all in the book. Okay. But Jesse Jackson visited Sammy at the Latin Casino. And I was sitting in the dressing room with Sammy, and Jesse walked in, Reverend Jackson, looked at me. I knew who he was. And he whispered to Sammy. And Sammy said, well, the guitar's my friend. Never forget that. Sammy, okay? The song, this is before he went to Chicago, where this thing happened. Steve Lawrence said to Sammy, you got to record this. It's a hit. Sammy said, I don't like it. From a Broadway play, it was a bomb. What am I going to record? You know the way Sammy was. Yeah. It became his biggest hit because of that night in Chicago. Every radio station played I Gotta Be Me. And it was Steve Lawrence who convinced him to do that.
I toured with Sammy for 3 years, and every night he sang that song, I just get chills because I remember that night so well. That's why I wanted to work with him. When I did my first appearance on The Tonight Show, my whole life changed. I was doing Dinah Shore, Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, Johnny Carson, Midnight Special, rock concert, Soul Train. I'm the only white comedian to ever do Soul Train because I have an album out in front of an all-black audience called That White Boy Is Crazy, But
well, right. That's the album.
That's the album. That's the album. But I kept pestering my agent at William Morris at the time, Debbie Miller. I said, I want to do this show. Sammy had a TV show called Sammy and Company at Harris Hotel out of Lake Tahoe. And I wanted to do that show. She said, Tommy, you're doing all these other shows. Why? I said, because there's something about Sammy that's so special. I just wanted to meet him. And I just had a feeling he would like my material as well. So about growing up in an all-black neighborhood. Some of you saw the show last night. I did some of those routines. So I wanted to do that show. So she couldn't get me on the show because Sammy's show wasn't getting good ratings, so they were trying to get big names.
Right.
And one day, Bill Cosby canceled, and they got a hold of me at the last minute, said, can you get on a plane and get to Tahoe right away? And I was on my way there when the producer of the show called my agent and said, tell Tom we don't need him. We got Sandy Barron at that time, another comedian. And she said, he's on his way there. And she almost started crying. She said, don't do this. He's been driving me crazy. So anyhow, I got there. When I got there, the producer said to me, he said, I saw you on The Tonight Show. This is a funny story, but he said, I don't want you doing any routines. And I was doing a lot of routines in those days about playing basketball on an all-black basketball team, playing football on an all-black football team. The neighborhood I grew up in. And the producer named Eric, he said, Tom, I saw you on The Tonight Show talking about doing a routine about black people. I don't want you to do that routine on this show today. And I said, that's what I rehearsed, what I prepared for. He said, Tom, Johnny Carson's white, but Sammy's black. And this is what I said. I said, no shit. And I thought he'd laugh, but he didn't think it was funny. But and I said, but look, I prepared for that and everything. And I'm a young kid at the time. And he looked at me, and I could see the look in his eye like this was a taped show. Go ahead. Go do it. I knew what he was thinking. We're going to cut you out of the show if they don't like. But Sammy fell on the floor. I mean, Sammy was laughing so hard that he pulled me. When I finished my stand-up, he took me over to the couch, and he said, I'm going to take you on the road with me. Yeah. And he took me on the road for 3 years.
Let me tell you, Tom can tell you, out of all of the performers, in my opinion, Sammy Davis not only was the greatest talent, but as a human being, he was the nicest guy.
Yeah.
I mean, you would ask him to do something. What want me to do now? Well, there's a church that just burnt down, man. You're in Philly. They asked me to come on over. Come on over. Okay, come on, let's go. Yeah. I mean, he was an amazing individual. George Verves, Shirley, Murphy Bennett, going back with all these names.
When you think, I'd sit in the wings every night. You're a young performer. It's like show business 101 to watch Sammy Davis Jr. night after night after night, or Frank Sinatra, or Dean, or any of those guys, to watch the way they took command of that stage. The first time I went to Caesar's Palace with Sammy, I had not ever worked Las Vegas. He said to me, we're at the Mill Run Theater in Chicago. One night he came in my dressing room. He said, let me digress. One night at the Mill Run Theater, that's my hometown. And every night I was killing the audience, but one night I didn't. It was a tough crowd. For some reason, I was off. And every night, Sammy would come to my dressing room before he went on. They would take an intermission. He'd say, how's the crowd, babe? I said, great. Just a great crowd. Oh, thank you. One night, he came to my dressing room. He said, how's the crowd, babe? I said, mediocre. He said, oh, he went outside and he walked back in. He said, what'd you say? I said, mediocre at best. He said, oh, okay. He went out there, and halfway through the show, when he did I Gotta Be Me, he got a standing ovation. Then he did What Kind of Fool Am I? He got a third standing ovation. He closed with Mr. Bojangles, got the fourth standing ovation, and the people were standing cheering, Sammy, Sammy, Sammy. He walked off stage, he walked by me, he said, you're right, they were a little bit slow tonight. You see when I said they were mediocre, that just said, okay, I'm going to get them. The same thing at that Black Expo. When those people booed and jeered, Sammy's a street guy. He's a street guy. You know what Frank would have done? Frank would have said, I'm out of here. Dean would have said, Bafa, and I'm out of here. Yeah. But Sammy said, okay, you just showed me what you got. Now let me show you what I got. You know, that was the difference between Sammy. When you sit in the wings and watch him, the first night at Caesars, I had never worked Caesars, and he said to me, I'd never worked Vegas. At the Mill Run Theater, he said, have you ever worked Las Vegas? He called me Babe. He said, ever worked Las Vegas, babe? I said, no. He said, well, you open there in January with me. I said, oh, God, so now you're driving down the strip, you know, all your dreams as a performer or comedian is one day working Las Vegas, and now you're driving down the strip, and this Sammy Davis made sure my name was on the marquee. See, a lot of big stars would only put their name. They didn't put the opening act's name. Tom Jones and Diana Ross, when they put their name on the marquee, there wasn't room for you to park your car in the parking lot, you know. It was so big. But Sammy insisted my name be up there big. You know, because he said to me, if I put your name on the marquee, whoever you work with after this, we set a precedent. Then we went inside, and Nat Brandywine, the conductor, says to me at rehearsal, he said, Tommy, you'll do 20 minutes, Sammy will do an hour and 10. Now, in those days, Caesar served food. The comedian died a death. A death. There was no way you could get that audience while they're all eating, and the waiters, their job, the waiters and waitresses, get that food out of there before the star comes out, before the headliner comes out. So you ate the big one. You'd go out there, and the comedians died. First of all, Caesar's I've been under contract at like 10 hotels in Las Vegas. Caesar's is the worst. For a comedian, it's got a high ceiling. Comedian's like a low ceiling. Laughter sound, it hits the ceiling and comes at you. But the Desert Inn, the Sands, great rooms. The Golden Nugget, Riviera, great rooms. The worst was Caesar's Palace. And now it's my first time. Sammy said to Nat Brandywine, he said, no, Nat, he said, this is Tommy's first time here. If he gets good reviews, he'll be invited back a lot. So he said, I'll open. He said, I'll come out and I'll do 3 or 4 songs, then I'll bring Tommy out. He said, Tommy, you do as much time as you want when you feel you got him. He said, and I'll just make up the time. And Nat said, it's your show, Sammy, whatever you want. You know, because Sammy knew that the waiters and waitresses are going to kill my show. So when Sammy would go out first, the waiters and waitresses see the headliner, they were taking food away from people who haven't even started eating yet. You know.
That's the true story.
Yeah. There's a star, you know, guy said, wait, I haven't eaten, wait, get my,
You know, people didn't realize this, but Sammy also loved singers. He loved Carmen McRae. Now, you know when you worked the Copa back then, it was a comedian or no comedian, you just came out. Sammy insisted that he wanted Carmen McRae to open up his show at the Copacabana back then.
Well, he would. First of all, Sammy prayed you got a standing ovation. A lot of headliners, they don't want that opening act to do too good, you know.
Right.
But Sammy and me, every time I headline, I'd have an a cappella singing group or something. I hope they get a standing ovation because that's getting that crowd up. That's what the opening act's job is.
Yeah.
Get that crowd ready for the star, for the headliner. But Sammy, on that day, I'm in my dressing room. It's in the afternoon. We're opening that night. So I went out to familiarize myself with the stage. You know, I was just walking the stage, and there's no one in the audience. Sammy came out, and he saw me. He said, what are you doing? I said, he said, are you a little nervous? I said, well, it's opening night. I've never worked here before in this huge room, and I'm opening for you. He said, see these boards? And I see, these are boards on the stage here.
Right.
This is what Sammy told me. He said, see these boards, Tommy? I said, yeah. He said, you earned every one of these boards. Every single one of these boards.
Walk anywhere you want.
All the dues you paid. These are your boards. This is our house, not their house. He said, you own these boards. Don't let them take these boards from you. He said, you earned the right to be here, you know. And then, again, like he would do 4 songs. Now, the waiters and waitresses got everything out of the room. The crowd's up. And Sammy would say, I'd be in the wings. My first time, Sammy would say, you've been a wonderful, you've been a great audience tonight, and you've followed me through my whole career. You've been very loyal to me. He said, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. He said, through the good times and the bad times, you've been with me. And so when people are good to you like that, your friends, he said, I think of my audience as friends. You want to do something for them, like maybe bring them a gift. I got a gift for you. I saw this kid on my show, and I'm going, oh, shit, don't go that high. Bring it down, because, the last thing a comedian wants is a big introduction, because, but anyhow, but that's how he'd introduce me every night. I got a gift for you. Welcome, please, Tommy Dreesen. And I'd come out and I'd say, I always dreamed that one day I would work Las Vegas, and I always dreamed that it would be Caesar's Palace. But I never dreamed that Sammy Davis Jr. would be my opening act.
Talking about that, Sammy worked the Schubert in the last days before he really got sick. And you know who his opening act was? Billy Eckstein. Billy, because he loved performers, and he never forgot working with them when he was just on the road.
But wait, Sammy tells a story. He would go to the Apollo Theater and watch Billy Eckstein. It was Mr. B. Billy Eckstein was a
Played
star.
trumpet, yeah.
Sammy said, I'd sit up in the balcony and I'd watch this big star, Billy Eckstein. So he later, when I toured with Sammy, sometimes it would be me, a singer, and then intermission, and then it would be Sammy. And Billy Eckstein was one of the guys. Now, Billy Eckstein's an old-time, for you old-timers who know who he was, smooth guy, old-time, paid dues like everybody did in those days. But anyhow, every night when I would finish my show, Billy Eckstein would come out, and he would say, he'd walk out, and when I'd walk up, and he'd say, how about that young comedian, Tom Dreesen? Wasn't he marvelous? I'm getting to a point. Marvelous young comedian. How about Tom? And they'd applaud and everything. So after about 3 nights, I said to him one night, he was eating, I said, Mr. B, I want to thank you. For what? I said, well, the nice things you say about me every night you come in. He said, come here, boy, let me tell you something. He said, don't you ever walk out on a stage where another entertainer has been and act like no one was here. He said, you think I'm complimenting you? I'm shooing your ass off the stage.
That's the way it did. He was responsible for Sarah Vaughan,
Yes.
Sarah Vaughan worked with Billy Eckstein, when Billy Eckstein had the band back then, if you remember. Play trumpet. Sammy loved performers. He really, really loved performers.
You're talking about a guy who at 2.5 years old wandered out on stage with his father and his uncle. His dad told me this story, Daddy Sam. He said, Tommy, Sammy was not even 3 years old yet. He said every night, his dad had custody of Sammy. He said Sammy was so tiny, he'd sleep in a drawer, a dressing room drawer. We could open the drawer, and Sammy could sleep in the drawer, And I said to Sammy, they didn't close the drawer, did they? But he told this story. He said Sammy would sit on an orange crate every night and watch his dad and his uncle do their show, the dance show. It was called, at that time, it was called the Will Maston Group. Yeah. When Sammy joined, it became the Will Maston Trio. But he said that he would watch them, Sammy, the little boy, but they closed with an old show business thing. You guys in the audience from show business, it's a buck and wing. Bow, 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 bow. There was a big ending, big clue. They called it a buck and wing. Boom. And Sammy watched. And one night, Sammy wandered out on stage and closed with his dad and his uncle. He did the same. He emulated his dad and his uncle. Now the audience went wild. This little boy out there doing that. So the uncle, who was a businessman, said, "Oh, we got something here, So he started every night. Sammy could do the bows. They called it bows. Sammy could do the bows, and he'd wait patiently. And finally, the stagehands built a little rocking chair for Sammy, and Sammy would sit in the rocking chair
watching.
And Daddy Sam said one night he looked in the wings, and Sammy had fallen asleep. The little boy had fallen asleep in the rocking chair, so he didn't wake him up. And after the show, he picked him up, he put him in his arms, and he's in the car. They're taking him back to the hotel when Sammy woke up. And his dad said, Sammy woke up, and he realized where we were. He said, you didn't let me take my bows. And he started beating his dad in the chest. You didn't let me take my bows. And Daddy Sam said, and we never stopped Sammy from taking his bows from that day on. This guy was born to be in show business. He was born to be in show business. He could sing as good as anybody out there. He could dance better than anybody out there. He could do comedy as good as any comedian I ever met. He could do impressions better than any impression that I ever met out there. He could play the trumpet. He could play the drums. He could play the piano. There wasn't anything he couldn't do on stage. He was a parade. He was born to do what he did.
Tom, do you remember the first record Sammy had was on Decca, and it was called Because of You. And he did impressions of Bogart. Because of You was a big hit for Tony Bennett in 1952. That was his first record. But he opened up singing, and then he did Oh, Because of You, and then he would do Gary Cooper. He could do anything. He just was
And you know what
special.
launched him? His uncle, Will. He really wasn't his biological uncle, but he called him Uncle Will. But he said to him, "Stop doing impressions of white folks. You're going to get us in trouble. Stop." This is back in the day when it was. He said, "You're going to get us in trouble doing don't do the impressions of white folks." They were at Ciro's, which is now the Comedy Store on Sunset Boulevard. It was Academy Award night, and they were opening for Janice Page.
Yep.
She was a star. And after the Academy Awards, all the stars came and sat in the audience. And the Will Maston Trio came out and just annihilated that audience. And Sammy started doing impressions of James Cagney, who was in the audience, James Stewart, who was in the audience, Bogart, who was all those people in the audience.
Gary Cooper.
And he was just killing the audience, Gary Cooper. And Jerry Lewis stood up and said, "Why don't you do an impression of me?" And Sammy had never done an impression of Jerry. And he did it right there. He did Jerry better than Jerry does Jerry. Now, they got the standing ovation after standing ovation. The next day, Janice Page said, "I'll open, you close." She said, I can't follow that. She was I can't follow. Now, and I'll tell you a great story. Jack Benny, Sammy told me this story, but Jack Benny was one of my heroes. I'll digress for a minute. I think a person is an artist in any endeavor when they make their work look one word, effortless. Frank Sinatra made singing look easy. You will be my music. You will be my song. You say, "I can do that." No, you can't. He just made it look like you could. Jack Benny made comedy look easy. He made it look effortless. And that's if you're a bartender, a truck driver, a bricklayer, if you make your work look one word, effortless. Sammy told me Jack Benny got the Will Maston Trio when they were hot to open for him at Caesars. And he said, now the Will Maston Trio went out and show you what a great comedian Jack Benny was, and what a daring comedian was. Sammy said, "We went out, Tom, and we annihilated that audience. We just had them on the pump, and they stood and cheered and cheered and cheered, and we went off that stage, and all the lights went down low, and the orchestra started playing Love and Bloom, and Jack Benny sauntered out to the microphone, real quiet, with the light on him, and he said, there was this guy who goes into a hardware store, and he says to the owner, and just then Sammy walked out and said, "Mr. Benny," he said, "What is it, Sammy?" He said, "In all the excitement opening night, we forgot to do our closing number." They just got like 5 standing ovations. He said, "Your closing number?" He said, "Yes. Do you mind, Mr. Benny?" He said, "Well, no, Sammy." And Sammy said, Jack didn't leave the stage. He went upstage a little bit. And Sammy did Birth of the Blues and just killed the audience. They nursed it, rehearsed it, and Jack's watching him. Now, standing ovation, and Sammy wanders up, and Jack watches him, walks off, and he goes, so this guy says to him,
we were talking backstage.
I was on the point. That's gutsy. Yeah. That could have went right in the tank, but that took a lot of courage to try to. And only Jack Benny could do that.
We were talking backstage about Johnny Carson, and I always said if you watch Carson, he did a little bit of Jack Benny, the way he would do his little takes.
Oh yeah.
He
admits that, by the way, that Jack Benny was an influence on him. As me, 2 comedians influenced me when I was starting out was Jack Benny and Richard Pryor, and for 2 totally different reasons. I'm a street kid. I don't have a degree from academia. I've got a doctorate from the streets. Richard Pryor spoke for my soul. When he was doing his routines, I knew those guys. I knew those people. It was like standing on the corner with guys. Richard was he touched me. But Benny, his artistry, and not being afraid to hear silence, to pause and wait for that to drift in. He wasn't afraid of silence, He was a wonderful man.
Let me ask you this question. The year with Frank, how did you hook up with Frank?
A lot of people say that I opened for Frank Sinatra for 14 years. Frank closed for me.
Yeah, I remember that. At the 500. at the 500 Club.
We were at his house one time at a house party, and a guy came up and said, "Now, how long have you been opening for Frank?" And I said, "You know, Frank actually closes for me." And Frank laughed. He said, "Yeah, I close for him." You know, and so when Frank laughed, I began to tell the story. You know, if Frank didn't think it was funny, I probably wouldn't have told the story. You know, but what happened was, after touring with Sammy for years, I was touring with Gladys Knight and the Pips. I was touring with Natalie Cole. I was touring with Mac Davis, with Tony Orlando and Don, with Frankie Avalon, my buddy. We were under contract at the Claridge Hotel. James Darren. And Bobby Rydell, all these guys from South Philly that I loved, you know, they were like brothers to me, and we still are the best of friends to this day. But anyhow, I was touring with Smokey Robinson. I was working Caesars in Lake Tahoe, and Frank was working next door at Harrah's, and and I wanted to see his show. I was with Smokey. I told this last night too, but I was with Smokey for 7 days, and I could have went to see Frank any night. I had been a fan of Frank's when I was a little boy shining shoes in the bars. Frank was on the jukeboxes, you know. And so I became a fan as a little boy. But so he was appearing next door at Harrah's, and I thought, I'll run over and I'll try to see his show. One of those 7 nights. Why I chose this particular night, I don't know. But I shoot over to Harrah's. As I'm running into the showroom, I didn't want to miss Frank's opening. I say Frank created more excitement walking to the microphone than most people did with their whole act. You know, when he walked out, geez, I can't tell you how many times around the country, in Dallas and in Boston and wherever, in Omaha, Nebraska, and Lincoln, Nebraska, when he walked out to that microphone, the electricity in that room and the excitement, you know. Anyhow, so I'm rushing over to Harrah's, and I didn't even change out of my stage clothes. I came off stage. I'm running into the showroom, and the vice president of Harrah's Hotel, a man named Holmes Hendrickson, very powerful guy in those days, saw me, and he was talking to a big heavyset guy with a cigar. And he said, Tommy, come here. And I reluctantly went over because I didn't want to miss Frank's opening. He said, Tommy, this is Mickey Rudin. Well, I recognize the name. That's Frank's lawyer, you know, the powerful guy. He said, Mickey, this is Tom Dreesen. And I think Tom would make a great opening act for Frank Sinatra. And the lawyer got a pained expression on his face like you heard it a million times. He rolled his eyes and he winked at the vice president, but he looked at me. He said, hey, kid, if I gave you a week with Frank, would you want more than $50,000? I said, Mr. Rudin, put it this way. If you gave me a week with Frank, would you want more than $50,000? He said, oh, I like this kid. I like this kid. And a week later, they said, you want to work with Frank at the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City? And I thought, yeah, I'll get my picture taken with him, hang it in every bar back in Chicago. And on the second night I was there, he and his wife, Barbara, took me out to dinner. And I remember like it was yesterday, he set his knife and his fork down. He said, I like your material and I like your style. I'd like you to do a few other dates with me if you're interested. And I didn't say, let me check my calendar. You know. I said, well, yeah. And it turned into 14 years of 45, 50 cities a year, a friendship that I miss him every day of my life. As you know, I was a pallbearer at his funeral. I spoke at his funeral. And it was just a great run. And I made up my mind. I saw this guy lose it sometimes. Frank Sinatra, you know, he was Sicilian, you know, and every now and then that would jump up, you know. He could have a temper. and I saw him go off on people sometimes. Most of the time, he was a great guy. And I made up my mind that if that ever happens to me, if he ever goes off on me, I'm going to grab his hand and shake it real hard and say, Frank, I can't tell you how great it's been being with you. Thanks for everything. And I was walking out because I'm not going to be someone's whipping boy. And I think he sensed that in me because that day never came. We never had a bad.
I saw that side of him.
Yeah, a lot of I did too. I saw him. You know, I saw him sometimes. The only time he ever got mad at me, and it's a fun story, and it was only for a moment. I would get in January, the Sinatra office would call me and say, "These are all the dates you're going to do," and I'd accept those dates. Come June, they'd give me the next 6 months. One June, they said to me, "Here's 6 months," and the last date was December 26th, the day after Christmas, to January 1st, the day after New Year's Eve. We would work that day. And I said, I can do all the dates, but that New Year's Eve, I have been under contract for 2 years to do something in Tahoe. And I said, so if you want to get a comedian for that week. They said, no, Tom, you work the whole week. We'll sub somebody that night. No, I just assumed Frank knew that. And so the whole year goes by, and I work the whole week, and now I take off for Tahoe. And Brad Garrett, who was on Everybody Loves Raymond, subbed that night. Okay? So anyhow, but I don't know Frank didn't know this.
Right.
So the next day, Hank Catania said, oh, the old man's pissed. You know, we called Frank the old man. Aboard ship, if you know, you guys in the service, the skipper, the captain, is the old man. It's not OLD, not the old man. It's the OL, the old man. That means the guy who's running the show. You know,
Out of respect.
yeah, the respect. So the old man. Hank says the old man's, upset. I said, why? He said, because you weren't here last night. I said, geez, everybody knew. He said, well, he didn't know. Evidently, what was happening. He's walking behind the curtain. He used to always listen to the end of my show, and sometimes the whole show, but he'd be pacing behind the curtain, and he heard a different voice. And he said to Jilly and to Elliot Weissman, who's that? And they said, that's Brad Garrett. He said, where's Tommy? He thought I got sick.
Yeah.
He said, I got sick. And he said, Tommy had another gig. And this is a great line. Frank said, can I swear? I never swear, but forgive me. This is what Frank said. They said, Tommy had a gig. He said, this ain't a fucking gig.
I know, I remember. Listen.
Forgive my but
Wait.
Working with Frank Sinatra ain't a gig.
Wait.
But so I come back the next day when he told me that. So I went right up to his suite, and I said, it was the next day. I said, Frank, I told the office, I told Dorothy Ullman, everybody knew. I told the office. He said, oh, Tommy, don't worry about it. And so we hadn't, but so it was never a cross day,
He was another. You're talking about giants. You worked with giants, Tommy. Really, I mean, going back to the beginning. I mean, think about that. The career. I mean, today a young comedian, where do they learn their trade? You did it on television. You did it on the stage. You worked venues. There are no more venues today other than comedy clubs or the TV things that they do today.
Well, you don't learn to work on TV. I mean, the clubs. We worked the Chitlin Circuit. We worked the Playboy Circuit. The Playboy Circuit really helped me and helped him too when we were a comedy team because we were doing 5 shows a night. There were 17 Playboy clubs in America and 2 resorts, Great Gorge and Lake Geneva. And you would go across the land doing 5, 6 shows. We do 7 days doing 5, 6 shows a night. You do the penthouse and the playroom. The penthouse and the playroom. You go up and down the stairs and do these shows, and your timing became impeccable. It was a launching. It was the end of vaudeville. It was another. Now, when I started out, there were no comedy clubs in America. In 1975, they started coming up, and within years, there were 550 comedy clubs in America. I was fortunate to go from the Tonight Show into Las Vegas. I didn't have to work the lounges. I went right into the main rooms with the stars. So I was fortunate. But today, comedians can learn their craft in these comedy clubs. There's so many of them across the land, but you can't make any money, hardly any money in them, But
it's a whole different industry.
it is, and it's a social media today. You want to be, when I did the Tonight Show, let's digress. Ed Sullivan Show, and I didn't do that show. 40 million people watch that show. One appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show. You were a headliner in Las Vegas. I did one appearance on the Tonight Show. I got a development deal from CBS the following day. My whole life changed. I was in the unemployment line with a wife and 3 kids one day, and the next day, one appearance on the Tonight Show, my whole life changed.
Yeah.
And that's how powerful that show was. But today, you could do 20 appearances on the Tonight Show, and they may not know who you are. It's the social media. These young kids that know how to work that social media, that's where it's at. That's where it's at. There is a comedian named Dane Cook. Dane Cook didn't do the Tonight Show. He didn't do any of those shows. He went on MySpace when it first came out and got something like 3 million fans. He sold out Madison Square Garden 2 days in a row. Sold out, arenas, 15,000 from the social media, learning how to get, comedy on there, bits on there, and get a following.
It could make you or also break you.
Yeah.
Social media. Social media is the new technology. I mean, I think we're not humans. We're robots. The social media controls us.
I'll tell you what's the danger is the politically correct police. Who are these people? Who are these people that are telling us what we must say? If you get a chance, go look on the internet. There's a thing called Tom Dreesen Rants about political correct police, and it's just about 3 minutes. I'll tell you what. I'm basically talking to 4 comedians, and I'm saying, who are these people that are telling us what we must say? We don't know who they are. We know who the Democrats are. We know who the Republicans are. We know who the Independents are. We know who the Moose, the Kiwanis, the Elks, the B'nai B'rith. We know who they are, but we don't know who the politically correct police are, and they keep telling us what we must say. There's a First Amendment in this country. Thousands of men and women died, so we have the right to say whatever we want to say. That's what America is about. That's what separates us from everybody else,
Right.
So
we're getting a cue.
Wait, I want to finish this point, and then we can get the cue. Thousands of men and women died. So we have the First Amendment. So we can say whatever we say. You don't have to listen to us. You can turn us off. We can't yell fire in a crowded theater, but we can say whatever we want to say. Comedians Lenny Bruce went to jail to protect the First Amendment. So it isn't the government telling us what we can say and what we can't say. It's social media telling you. We will destroy your career if you don't follow our line of thinking. And when people start telling you what you must say, they're only one step away of telling you what you must think. And then we have communism. So I say to them, I don't know who you politically correct police are. You know, we know everybody else is. So here's what I have to say to you. Kiss my black ass.
Tommy Dreesen, ladies and gentlemen. That is the greatest way to end the Q. I love it.
Thank you very much.